Welcome to the Glassworking shop. Well, the last video was just getting too long. When I looked at it on the editing software, I realized that it was much too long for one piece, so I split it into three. Here's part two. One of these assemblies is the result of many, many hours of work. So in the far flame, this little triangle guy was made on the squeezer. It's made fairly precisely. The squeezer can make exceptionally precise forms. It can also make unexpectedly imprecise forms because, as I've said in other videos, it doesn't take all the art out of glasswork. It's a tool, and it doesn't work easily or automatically. You have to learn its quirks, learn what it can do, what it can't do. Gotta make sure that I got the right side here, because this is important. So yes, that is the right side. A rather challenging little subassembly here. Trying to get it to tag. Trying to get, yeah, that's tagged reasonably well. Trying to get fire down into a deep valley is often kind of challenging. Okay, back into rotation mode. Make sure I keep the moil hot, because certainly don't want this thing falling off at this stage. Carefully making sure that the squeezing die isn't too hot. I'm going to select a larger die here. Switch to handwork and get out the big flame, the Delta Mag. Which brings up another somewhat related topic, that I'm using a homemade DIY oxygen system, and yes, it can support a Delta Mag. Got both a high pressure and a low pressure system. The low pressure system is pumped up to 175 psi. The high pressure has 2 home fills pumped up to 1,000 psi. Everything is automated. Now, there are quite a lot of gaps in this assembly, and this is kind of by design because I want to see how the glass kind of squashes into place and how it flows as it fills up the gaps. As the piece gets larger and larger, it becomes more and more challenging to drive the heat into the core of the piece, because that's where I want the heat to be, is in the core. Also kind of using gravity a little bit to keep everything under control. As you can probably easily imagine, the trick in this work I'm trying to get it hot enough to be squeezable, but if it gets too hot, it starts getting limp. I'm also preferentially heating one side over the other because I'm trying to get that last triangle piece that I put in, I want it to be a little harder, and I want the substrate that it's pushing into to be a little softer so that I get a little deeper penetration and a little bit more squeezing. If I concentrated the heat on the outer part of the triangle, then the inner part wouldn't really do much of anything. I'm standing on the squeezer, I'm going to do a little bit of a touch-up here. There's a tiny bit of a gap on one of my assembled pieces. That doesn't quite make it all the way to the moil. I think I'll just weld a bit of clear. Hey, it's getting hot. For those who don't work with large pieces of hot glass, the radiant heat coming off a large piece of glass can be really something. that I've got this thing stably attached. And that one's getting a little bit hot, so this is also fairly close to reaching the limits of the squeezer. This is probably the biggest piece I've made, and it's a bit of a challenge. I will be switching to, or not switching, but I will be getting my safety gear, my chrome suit, and my face shield as the radiant heat starts becoming more oppressive. Once again, what I'm trying to do here is build core heat so that I get squeezing going on inside the piece, inside the core, and being careful not to overheat the surface, and preferentially heating the piece I'm squeezing into as opposed to the triangular piece that's being squeezed. But of course I have to heat everything, so figuring out the balance in this is rather tricky. Also, planning in advance how many pieces of prep to make, how big they should all be. Still is a lot of mystery. It's a lot of guess and hope. This one is actually coming out roughly the size I thought it would be. Maybe a little bigger, but this is going to be a big boy. This is definitely going to be a big boy when it's done. Standing on the squeezer, maybe even bouncing a little bit. When the hot glass hits the graphite, the surface freezes immediately, but the inside retains its core heat. This is something I learned early on as I was teaching myself how to use the squeezer, that when I first started using it, I would squeeze for a shorter amount of time and think I was done, not realizing that there was still plenty of core heat and still plenty of softness down inside. And now I'm trying to use that to my advantage to actually preferentially heat certain parts of the design to try to get the squeezing action I'm looking for. course, you might wonder, why am I not using the NQALHA for this? Because I'm trying to, as opposed to heating a round object where rotation makes sense, this guy has lots of sharp corners. And I'm trying to avoid overheating the sharp corners and concentrate the heat on the faces. So, like I've said in many of these videos, the NQALHA is a great assistant, but it doesn't eliminate the need for handwork. I am starting to get this guy formed up into a triangle. And it's actually coming out surprisingly well. I was a tiny bit uncertain that I had made the correct size, geometry, and volume of prep. I don't have a systematic way to guarantee when everything is squeezed together what the final result will be. So a lot of it is just by guess and experience. Which is another thing about this process. I can't go to my local squeezer teacher, because this is a new machine. I invented it. I have to teach myself. Kind of reminds me of the story of the helicopter, which I've told many times in my videos. Igor Sikorsky invented the helicopter and then had to teach himself how to fly it. And for anybody that's ever tried to learn to fly a helicopter, it's hard to learn to fly a modern one with a competent instructor. Can't imagine how old Igor was actually able to survive flying his first prototype. But that's what I'm doing. I'm flying my first, well, it's not actually the first prototype. The squeezer has been through multiple design iterations. I've just about got this guy triangularized and ready for the last additional pieces. I kind of almost want to stop now, but the pattern demands the final two pieces. I hope it doesn't overwhelm Mr. Squeezer. Trying to use gravity to get a tiny bit of elongation here, because I still have a little more squeezer length available, but I'm getting very close to the limit of the size of my squeezing dies. I think I'll be fine. I don't think there's anything to be worried about, but still. standing on the squeezer, and if anything's happening, it's happening really, really slowly down there in the core. So that is now triangularized. Base of the Bunsen gets hot. Okay. Grab my last two pieces. The other challenging thing about making a project like this is to try to visualize how it's going to end up. And I'm getting a little better at predicting it, but there still is quite a lot of surprise going on. Sure if my Bunsen is working correctly, but as I was kind of stretching the piece, the substrate, I ended up accomplishing what I wanted to accomplish, which is to stretch it, but now my pre-made piece here is a little bit too short, so I'm kind of yanking on it. To lengthen it just a tiny bit. And I think I have achieved success here. And make sure to keep the oil hot. I think it is still tagged. Just doing some minor adjustment. One more piece. Okay. The auxiliary heat shield is protecting the NQALHA. I'm carefully and gently, slightly stretching the piece that I'm attaching. Definitely need a method of moving the Bunsen around that doesn't transfer heat from the Bunsen into the mechanism, some sort of wood-handled thing or something, I don't know. So, time to reconfigure the squeezer. Yep. Way too hot to touch. I'm going to be going to the biggest fixed size squeezing dies that I have, which is 2-inch. I could use the iris style dies, but they tend to introduce distortions that I don't want in this pattern. In some patterns, distortions are fine. In some patterns, distortions are even desirable. They're actually kind of cool. Okay, I am feeling far more confident now. All the pieces are assembled. It's actually looking reasonably good. Of course, none of this stuff ever goes perfect. I don't know if I'll ever get it perfect because It's a kind of a fact of life among makers that your ability to criticize advances faster than your ability to do. Which is a kind of a sad thing when I think about all the projects that I've made in over 60 years of making stuff. All I remember is the mistakes and the imperfections, and oh yeah, that one was really good, but that one was almost great, but